Hey guys, another episode of Senior Living Foresight TV, or really just Foresight TV. I think this actually might be one of the most important conversations that we have had to date, talking about the role that REITs play in senior living. But before we get started, I've got Keith Parnell here, who is with Hamilton Insurance, and Hamilton is sponsoring this live broadcast. And we have had really exciting news that came out. We've been sort of having this vaccine excitement kind of for the last week or 10 days, right? But we saw today that Pfizer is submitting their application for rapid approval. And from an insurance perspective, I know you're so deeply involved in the whole liability issue and what it means to senior living. What do you see? The vaccine? What kind of impact do you see it having on the industry? Oh, Keith, I can't hear you. Okay, there you go. Nope. I'm going to give it 30 seconds, and then whether or not we're going to try it again another time. One more time. Nope. Okay, we are going to have to do this separately. I'm so sorry. We should have. The four of us were so busy talking, we didn't actually test your mic, and bad on us. So, Mandy, you were talking about doing this live, right? I mean, this is what happens, and it's part of the fun.
That's right.
Keith, go ahead. You look like you're going to try one more time. Oh, there we go.
There you are.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
That was a great question. And again, thank you for letting us be a part of your organization. The vaccine is going to be great when it comes out, and I think it's going to, save a lot of lives. Unfortunately, this is not something that's going to have an immediate impact on the liability issues. The claims that you see from deaths and medical malpractice typically lag a year to two behind when the incident actually happens. So what'll happen is these insurance companies are just starting to get claims in, and they're going to be, fighting these things over the next few years. There is possibly relief at the federal level. They're talking about some kind of tort reform that would help in some states, but many states don't subscribe to the federal guidelines. They have their own guidelines in the state. So some states it'll help, some states it won't. In those states, some of them have talked about liability protection as well, but they left caveats in there for like gross negligence. Well, plaintiff attorneys are going to try and prove that it was grossly negligent that you allowed the virus in your building. So for the immediate impact, it's going to save lives, but for the liability, I don't see much changing over the next 2 years. And in fact, it could get a lot worse if they start paying out big judgments.
Yep. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. It's going to be really interesting to watch. I think that maybe we should touch bases again in another few months when we start to see this play out, when we start to see lawsuits hit. I hope that at least for gross negligence, we do see some tort reform and some protection there, because I think that mostly senior living organizations have done a really, really good job, and we know that with community spread does come infection. So, Keith, thank you so much. I'm going to move you off the platform, and let's jump into REITs and senior living. Thanks again. Okay, so I have written so many times, sort of been not necessarily the biggest fan of the REIT model of senior living, and I know it's caused some distress. And then with an article at a competing publication, I found myself just totally in defense of what you guys are doing, and I've been amazed at what REITs have been doing. So let's actually, this is leadership from LTC Reit. Let's actually start with two things. I'd like to have each of you introduce yourselves, what the role you play for the REIT, and let's do just maybe a minute or so on what makes REITs unique in the senior living space. I think that people sort of know what they're out, but I'm not sure there's some unique things about REITs. So who's going to start? Clint? Pam? Mandy?
Pam, raise your hand.
Good.
Hi, I'm Pam Kessler. I'm co-president and CFO at LTC Properties. And I think one of the aspects that sets LTC apart and REITs in general from other capital providers is the long-term nature of the capital we provide. We give the operators, essentially it's 100%, financing. We buy the asset, finance it long-term. They don't have to worry about a recap 3 to 5 years in. They know they control their own destiny. And I think that's a superior product because they get to take advantage of our, competitiveness and raising low-cost capital and passing that along to them. I think if they look at their entire capital stack, their common equity, their debt, and price that, they will see that the all-in rate that the REIT gives them is a very competitive rate. And they know what their financing is going to be for the entire length of their lease. They typically have a 10-year lease, 2 5-year renewal options, or 2 10-year renewal options. I mean, it's effectively for the life that they plan to operate the asset.
So I'm sorry, I'm smiling, Mandy, at your camera fall there. That was awesome.
My surface just collapsed. Oh no!
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's what makes this live so much. So Pam, that's really terrific. I want to just one sort of clarification on that. So that means that when the property is sold, that the operator doesn't typically get any benefit in appreciation when the property is sold. Is that correct or not?
Well, REITs generally we don't sell. Our goal in buying a property is long term. The life of the asset. So there are occasions that we do sell, and that's typically when the operator, is exiting in a market, or that market is not in their core anymore, and they would like to exit it. A REIT will either release the asset or sell it. But if the operator is performing and wants to stay in that property, I mean, it's up to them. It's their option.
But Steve, I would also hop in and say another aspect that, we've listened to operators, and in the last couple of years, one thing we've done is we've entered into real estate joint ventures with operating companies. So that does, they have to put equity into the transaction, but that does give them a component ownership of the real estate. So if there is a sale in the future, they can't participate. Okay. That's an element of how we've listened to operators. Again, that doesn't work for everybody, but to the extent operators have that wherewithal and investment in the property, we can monetize a portion of the real estate, but yet let them stay in. So I think that's been helpful. Another thing that I think this is from the triple net side of the REIT space. We hear both sides of the equation. Some operators like to be fee-for-service managers, and others actually want to be able to have autonomy to run their business, their business philosophy, their marketing, their brand. They don't want to have somebody else have input and say so. So the one thing the triple net lease structure does is it affords operators where the REIT is less intrusive, because under a triple net structure, we're not going in an operational side saying you must do this, you must do that. So it's just it provides a different financing source. There's a lot of choices as far as how operators finance their business and their real estate. This just provides a choice.
I like that a lot. So
you got to introduce yourself, or I'll introduce you.
You got to introduce yourself. Yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
So Clint Malin, co-president, recently promoted with Pam to our new roles, and chief investment officer for the company. Pam and I have been working together for 16 years alongside Wendy, and that's my role. So Mandy, you got to jump in and give us your role.
That's right.
Oh, that's easy. Mandy Hogan, Vice President of Marketing and Investor Relations, and I've been at LTC for 5 years, coming up soon. So not quite the tenure, but enough to kind of be part of the team for sure.
Yeah,
it feels like home. Yeah, it feels like home. So what makes LTC different than other REITs? Because every operator, of course, has choices and people they're talking to. I've got some ideas about how I see it, and I think that I find you guys really refreshing, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
Well, I think every REIT's different, and you look at the size of the organizations. One thing about LTC is we are a small cap REIT. And obviously, in working with, I think a lot of what attracts people to REITs is looking at the culture of REITs and who they're interacting with. We have, a very limited number of personnel. We have a small team, and so with our operators, they're dealing directly with leadership within the company. So I think that's one thing that's unique about LTC. And given our size, our focus has really been on regionally based operating companies and also doing smaller transactions. Smaller transactions for us, we think there's a better value proposition as opposed to competing for large transactions. I think the pricing is better for that, but also it serves a strategy that Pam and I have been focused on is diversification of our operator base. As we've seen in the public and things get talked about, when you get high levels of concentration, that can provide challenges. So we really are focused on diversifying our operator base, and that allows us to focus on one-off transactions.
Yeah, and I would add to that being a smaller REIT is our operators work one-on-one with the decision makers. It's not, you're not working with an investment professional that doesn't have a decision-making capability. So you can typically get, answers to your questions in a more timely fashion. And, there's not the bureaucracy of some larger companies. And another thing that we've done that's a little different, which I would say it's more traditional, is not enter into the RIDEA transactions. We've listened to our operators who desire the triple net lease because they want to control their own destiny. They don't really want their capital partner, reporting. They don't have to report to them every day. Having the operating partner assist them in decision making. They want to reap the benefits of 100% of their efforts in growing the bottom line, and that's your traditional triple net lease. That's what it gives you. You're not sharing your upside that you created with your capital partner.
And we think that
at the same time that gives. Go, Clint.
I was to say, we think operators are motivated, when their efforts and successes are reflected in the bottom line, and that's where we think alignment of interest occurs, and that's why we haven't pursued RIDEA, because if an operator doesn't have ownership in the real estate or the opco, there's the fee for service manager, which a lot of the RIDEA structure I think ends up being. It just, for us, we don't feel that alignment of interest is there in being able to be rewarded by participation in the bottom line. Now, with that being said, Steve, one thing to think about from a REIT perspective is not all transactions are probably best served by being financed by a triple net lease.
Right.
And that's a function of the one philosophy that we've had for a long time is that if the last dollar is on the negotiating table, that's probably not the best triple net lease structure, because what it does is that provides pressure on operators. If more money is taken out up front, you just got to pay a higher rent on down the road, and that that can create a misalignment of interest and put too much pressure on a REIT, on an operator in a REIT structure. So we've tended to shy away from those transactions. I don't think those are the best fit for the triple net lease structure.
So, as you know, there's been criticism, particularly in the time of the pandemic, that because REITs, I'm going to be a little bit harsh about saying this, is not to you, but this is sort of this impression that REITs are taking, want their pound of flesh first, and that what means is that staffing is harder to do, PPE is harder to pay for, and the REITs only care about the dollars. We saw that again, in an article published elsewhere in the last few weeks. And I'm going to start by saying that as I've watched how the REITs have behaved during the pandemic, that's not what I'm seeing out there. But I'd love to just, I think rather than sort of trying to necessarily directly rebut that, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about what you're doing for your operators who are really struggling in this, and how what your philosophy is and how you're addressing those questions.
Well, I think Mandy probably should talk about this, and goes back to the beginning of the pandemic and some of the actions that we took and facilitated. So Mandy, why don't you speak a little bit about that?
Mandy, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Mandy.
You're on mute.
Oh, we've had 2 of those moments now.
Yeah.
Because of course, after I drop my computer, then the trash truck goes by. So. oh, the joys of working at home, right? So we've done some things that are kind of outside, well, not necessarily outside of the box, but really with the aim to help our operators beyond financial stuff, so immediately what we did was create a portal, and it's a secure portal for our own operators. So they're not getting spammed and, sold or any of that kind of stuff, but it just provides information about PP&E or what's going on with the government reimbursement or government assistance acts or things like that. So we've created a portal for them. And that was the first immediate thing that we've done. We've also done some interesting things like work on the programming side, quickly understanding that there couldn't be activities in a building necessarily. One of our partners, Lynn Katzman from Juniper Communities, had the idea to create a website called Virtual Connections. And what that does is provide activities or a resource to help activity directors come up with things to do, essentially. That's, it could be spiritual, it could be arts, it could be museums, virtual tours of all these things that are happening now, sports, cards, whatever you want. So we kind of created a portal to help our operators, with activity assistance. We've also created something called Smart Design, which is a program. It's a turnkey program to help with infection control. And beyond infection control, it helps kind of position buildings for the future. So what I mean by that is that we partnered with Avenue Development, and they've done all the hard, heavy lifting, but we can help provide anything from, ventilation to cleaning products to touchless technology that helps, think about toilets or faucets or doors or whatnot. And there's also a pretty strong marketing component to that, which means, once these protocols are installed, then the operator or the building has been taken up a notch. And so it's beyond COVID. It's more, it could be for C. diff, it could be for influenza, it could be for any other thing. It's just kind of taking the building to the next level. So Avenue has vetted the vendors and they do the heavy lifting and the installing, but we help our operator, we help finance it with our operators. And then the other thing we've done is contributed pretty heavily to the industry, just in terms of lobbying efforts and whatnot. So Steve, I don't know if that was your question or if you were looking for more than financial.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things we know has happened, and one of the things I love, I tend to, oftentimes I don't listen to the transcript or the earnings calls from REITs live, but I'll go back and read through the transcripts, and I always find yours to be amazingly refreshing, because they so often you talk about the ugly stuff and not just the good stuff, and you actually give, rather than just saying we've got this operator who's in trouble, you really give some color about how you're working on it. We know that in the time of pandemic, there are a number of operators out there who are not making their covenants, and maybe they're not able to make their payments, or they can make their payments, but they don't have the right coverage ratios, or there are other things going on. Can you talk to me a little bit about how do you deal with, work with, interact with operators where they're outside their covenants?
Well,
go ahead, Pam.
The first thing we do is try to work with them, and we assess, the market and what's happening. Like, for example, prior to COVID, the senior housing industry, was in a bit of an oversupply, and lease ups had become protracted. Things that were leasing up in 12 to 18 months were more like 18 to 24 to 36 months. And so we worked with several of our operators that we had done development with to give them some support. And as long as there was improvement, they're making changes and tweaks, and as long as we felt they were working hard and we were seeing improvements, we continued to give the breathing room, restructure or temporarily reset rents. For those operators where we didn't see the improvements, and we felt maybe our properties weren't getting 100% of the attention, and that maybe another operator would do a better job, because it wasn't necessarily a function of the market. It might have been also some operator distraction, because operators we're developing things outside of our relationship, and maybe those are getting more attention. We transitioned, reached an amicable agreement to transition the properties. So, and this has been I've been with LTC since 2000, and I would never say there's been an easy time, That's part of what we do as a REIT and as a management team, as we, try to maximize the performance in our properties, through operators. Sometimes you have to make a transition, but that is definitely a last resort. We generally feel like we've tried everything before we've reached that point.
Do you find, I just have this sense, sort of because of from anecdotal kinds of things, but I have this sense that there are times when operators need help and could do a better job, and I don't know whether they're afraid or embarrassed to ask, where even you'd actually be glad to help if they'd step up, but you don't know what they want. Is that just a misperception, or do you find that happens?
No, I think, some operators are very good about, discussing things early, bringing it to your attention early, or saying, hey, this is what we're seeing in our marketplace. Like, there's another building that's going to open down the street, and we are expecting some occupancy pressure or maybe rate pressure. We might need to look at discounting. So maybe the coverage is, you're going to see a, downturn in coverage. We hope it's temporary. I mean, it's, in our partnership, we always want to have the dialogue. I mean, we're not asking them every day for what's your update today, or on Monday, how was lead generation over the weekend. But we definitely are working with them, and we're trying to keep a pulse on all the markets that we're in, and what our operators are seeing on the ground, because they're our eyes and ears. And I don't know, Clint, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I'd say it's part of our asset management function as well, is just being engaged with our operators. I mean, we would much prefer, as Pam mentioned, for somebody to be proactive and come talk to us, because if it gets to a point where it's beyond recovery, we didn't have the opportunity to try to find a way to make adjustments along the way. So we encourage people to come to us sooner rather than later to try to help work on that together, because it's better not to be surprised. As Pam mentioned, if there's a new building in the market and we don't know about that for 6 to 9 months down the road, it's more challenging to act at that point in time. So, because if an example of that, if it's a new building in the market, one of the questions we always ask is it operator or market specific? Well, if it's an example of a new building in the market, that's market specific. So, I mean, whether we go with the existing operator or a new operator, that new building still exists. And so, that's our approach, and try to avoid surprises. We encourage people to reach out to us proactively.
So I talk to a lot of sort of C-suite type of people who are operators, but I also have a fair amount of dialogue with people who are running buildings, so executive director levels. And I was recently talking to an executive director who was really distressed because he was given no budget, really nothing to do anything to celebrate the holiday season with his team, and it just makes him really hard. It makes him feel cynical about the management. And as he was telling me about it, the gut feeling that I went through is, I kind of think that that the capital providers probably actually wouldn't be very happy about that, because it sort of takes the whole team down and it makes it hard. Am I thinking about that right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you couldn't be more right about that. I mean, if buildings are successful and work when you have a cohesive team in place, and there's motivations and there's collaboration. If challenges fester within a community, I mean, that's potentially leading to problems. So that's an example. Like, even when we go tour, or back before, pre-COVID, when we could tour buildings, one of our biggest focuses in evaluating our own portfolio or looking at new investments is walking through buildings with owners, regional operators, or the executive director. And the thing that's most impressive to us, if we're touring a building and an executive director says, I need to go take care of a resident, I'll be back with you. We love to see that.
I love that.
Some people are focused on us because they think our time is valuable and they want to cater to us being in a building. The value is that they care for their residents and their staff, and we're second going through the building. So that's always a benchmark of what we look at in touring properties.
I love that. The best tour I've ever taken. Early on when I was blogging, I did regular tours, sort of not exactly mystery tours. I'd identify who I was. The best tour I've ever had, not an executive director, was on the weekend, and it was a manager on duty who was the maintenance supervisor at a Sunrise building here in the Sacramento area. And nobody'd ever hire her for a marketing director. Her English was improper, and but every resident and every family member stopped. This is all pre-COVID. Stopped to give her a hug, and everybody knew her, and she knew everybody. And so those kinds of relationships are just, they're like gold. And so I appreciate that. I want to touch on a couple of comments that are coming in. First question is with your operators, do they have to have skin in the game when they're working with you? Do they have to put money in?
Typically,
what does that look like?
Well, it depends on the structure. So obviously, if we have a real estate joint venture, then yes, they have skin in the game with us. If it's not a real estate joint venture and it's a triple net lease, I mean that sort of credit enhancement element can come in different facets, because we look at credit enhancement in total. It can be comprised of a security deposit, a guarantee, some type of covenants that is if operations aren't performing, that they add security at that point in time, or coverage alone can be a credit enhancement. So we really look at it as what's the uniqueness of this deal, and how do we best match the credit enhancement with the operating partner that we're working with. And we look at all those elements as aspects, and it can be one or the other, or it can be elements of all of them. So we're very flexible in looking at trying to match the credit enhancement to the risk profile and what works for the operator specifically.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you say is you're not going to go, if I have been even say an apartment developer and I've built 2 houses as a developer and I decide I want to become an operator, probably not going to get very far if I decide to become an operator in senior living. You've got to have some creds,
Yes.
Right? So
have a little bit of gravitas, yeah.
So I think that are you still doing new transactions, or are you looking at the market and saying this is terrible, we're not interested in talking to people anymore?
No,
absolutely.
No, we're absolutely in the market. We just closed 2 transactions this past quarter. We're looking at right now shorter term structured finance type of investments, mezzanine and preferred equity, because that's where we're seeing the most need and request from operators. Some traditional lenders have pulled back. LTVs or loan to costs for developments have gone down. The requirement is for more equity now, and there's not as many people playing in that space, and so we've been able to actually source quite a few deals.
And those have been on construction projects, Steve. Those have been on construction. And so right now, we're looking at how we deploy capital, and the risk-adjusted returns we think are better for that, because we're investing money in a preferred equity structure lower in the capital stack. So more of a secured position. And also we're avoiding the aspect of COVID, during that. So we're looking at this with operators that have a history and track record of development. But we're seeing more transactions as of late. But a lot of that, there's definitely price disconnect that we're seeing on price discovery, as far as some buildings that have lease-up challenges and people wanting pre-COVID pricing for operations where they currently are. So it's hard right now to assess long-term where margins might shake out, cap rates. So doing the shorter-term investments right now, allows us to sort of look past those items on a long-term basis. But we are looked at a couple deals with existing operators to acquire, so we would do it for existing operators, and or we could add it into an existing master lease.
I think that there are going to be some tremendous opportunities where, how do I say this gently, where maybe the operator isn't as good as they could be and somebody else is going to come in. There was a great story in the Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday, and I'll write about this, where as all the airlines are pulling back, Southwest is actually really aggressively going out and picking up gates that are being abandoned by other legacy airlines. Even though they're losing a lot of money, they just can have this long vision. And I would think that you probably got some operators out there who are really doing very relatively well in the marketplace, even in spite of COVID. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So I have one more question. This is a question I love to ask people more than any other question when I'm doing interviews and that kind of thing. So I'm clearly the oldest person here, but I've still got a few years before I'm quite ready for senior living. But I want each of you to imagine that you're now, say, I don't know, 85, 87 years old, and you're starting to think about senior living. What does that senior living community that you would like to live in look like? Who are we going to start with? Mandy? Okay, Pam, go ahead.
Go Pam.
Go, Pam.
Well, this is much talked about, but a lot of people take it to mean when you say aging in place that they want to age in their home, and I would assume, perhaps my husband is still with me at 85, but perhaps he's not. 85, that's not always the case. But so I would be looking for a place that I could age. I would probably be at 85. Hopefully I might be more on the IL side, but I would want to be able to, as I needed more care, be able to get that care. So I would be looking for something that's maybe IL, AL, and I don't know, hopefully not memory care, but if I ever needed it, that it's good to know it's there and that I wouldn't have to move, because moving is disruptive. And most people, the thing they say the most is they want to be able to age in place. So when looking at a community, I would want to have all those features there. And obviously all of it, because I'm young at 85, I want to be a young 85, activities and friendships, because I would be moving there for a social aspect at 85. I would want, my kids are doing their own thing, so they're not coming to visit, and the grandkids are not coming to visit grandma every weekend. So, I would want some, personal interactions and social stimulation.
Perfect. I love that. Mandy?
Well, I echo very much of what Pam says. I mean, the whole reason I would go is probably for the social interaction as well.
Mandy's doing social.
That's definitely why. I can go now if you want. I don't have to wait till I'm 85.
Yeah.
I've seen some beautiful communities I would not mind living in, that's for sure.
They would love to have you, Mandy. You'd be the life of the party.
Oh, God.
Yeah, there are 3 or 4 buildings that I've been in that I'd be ready to move into now. So I absolutely agree with you. And Clint, last but least, how about you? What are you looking for?
Obviously what Pam, my man, talked about, but I think for me would be, going into some community where there's meaning and purpose, where you have the ability to have engagement. I've seen this with my mother, who lived on her own after my father passed away, and not having socialization, not having engagement, not having purpose. That is a huge drag on just one's outlook. So going in and knowing that there's programs and ways for, I can demonstrate my purpose back, and whether that's intergenerational or something, but I think having that meaning and purpose extends life, and I think it makes it more rewarding and successful. And that would be I hope at 85, when I'm young at 85, that, I can have that and be able to give back as well.
So, Clint, I love that. That's probably, for me, would be the biggest thing, would be to be in a place where I could continue to give back. I guess the only other thing and that I'm looking for, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, is I would love to see if we could somehow figure out how to do a better job of creating intergenerational living. I know there's some communities that do great things where they have day care and that kind of thing. But when I look at it, I find that this is going to sound terrible to say. I'm not sure I just want to live with a bunch of other old people. I would like to live with people who are doing, different generations. And I know there are licensing issues, but to me, that seems like the big opportunity in the industry. So anything else I should be asking you about or talking about, because we're about out of time here?
No, I think we hit all the high points.
Yeah.
Point.
I would
So
just,
if
the only thing I would like, the one thing I
Go.
would leave out, Steve, just is that, as we've said on our earnings calls, we really do appreciate, the efforts put forth by operators within our portfolio with, in the industry. As we saw early on in the pandemic, and which Mandy helped facilitate, we had operators in our portfolio that were sharing information. They weren't selfish. They were collaborating, and it was really impressive to see. And so, as we go into winter here and we have increased cases of COVID, we really sincerely appreciate all of the efforts that operating companies are putting forth from, staffing, residents, family members. So we give a shout out of appreciation for all the efforts that they're doing and putting forth to care for, their residents, patients, as well as staff.
Yeah. And Mandy, the website for Activities Director, is that just for your operators? Or is that open to everybody?
No, that's open to everybody on the planet, and it's free. It's I'll tell you, it's slvirtual.com. So think like senior living,
Perfect.
but slvirtual.com.
Fantastic. So we will, and one more sort of related to that. If somebody said, I'd like to, an operator is watching this and said, I'd love to work with those guys, how would they reach out to you?
They can call me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm assuming everybody here is on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Mandy Hogan with an I, M-A-N-D-I, Hogan. Or Steve, I can send you my contact or whatever.
Yeah, I think probably LinkedIn. I'm always, go to the website or look for Mandy on LinkedIn. I'm always sort of reluctant to just sort of toss out people's email addresses because ultimately anybody can watch this, right? So, but find Mandy or go to the LTC website. We will drop the links in after this video has rendered. We'll drop links in to the activity resource site and to your website as well. Guys, thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful, though I'm sure weird, Thanksgiving next week.
Yeah.
So, and we will be, one more thing I want to just say to the audience, we will be back on the day after Thanksgiving. It won't be sort of a traditional thing. I think we're going to spend some time in getting you to meet some of my team, and we're working on maybe doing a little bit of music with you as well. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Thank you for changing the world with your capital. I mean, you really are. You're making it a better place for residents and for team members, and I'm so grateful that you're doing that.
Thank you for having us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Happy Thanksgiving.